So just to set us up a little bit before we get into the text, the traditional route, as we've talked about several times, of the children of Israel being up here roughly in the land of Goshen, and approximately starting here, going somewhere across the Red Sea, or as it's noted on here, the Gulf of Suez, and probably coming down here into this area. And we just left them in Rephidim, where they had battled the Amalekites, and have moved on and are getting ready now for one of the major milestones on the trip, which is their encampment at Sinai and the giving of the law and all that entails in terms of the covenant. So, as they have moved on, and I've showed you this before, but the reason we choose that route is that when you come across the Red Sea, there's very little area that's easy to traverse. And we've got 1 million to 3 million people, and because of that, they need a generous area that they can hike through, if you will, and probably around the peninsula, the Sinai Peninsula there, is where they went. That's probably where Moses went when he came out of Egypt. And initially, after his killing the Egyptian and being fearful for his life, he ran off. And then that would also help him in his preparation for coming back. Because we know that in Genesis 3, where he is probably in this area, when he encounters a burning bush, he's probably in the area of Mount Sinai. And when he's there in Exodus chapter 3, it mentions that he is bringing the people back, and he's coming back to that specific area. And so, in effect, this is the fulfillment of that prophecy that God made to him back in Exodus 3:12. He said in Exodus 3:12, "But I will be with you, and this sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought back the people of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain." And so it makes a good link back to Mount Sinai. Now, we think that Mount Sinai was probably in this area right down here. And the truth is, we don't know the exact location. We're not even sure of the near location, but that's the best guess based upon how the geography is now, which is not necessarily exactly how it was back then, but how it is now and the relationships we can make. Some commentators speculate it might have been even as far as Saudi Arabia or over toward what we considered the land of Midian at that time. But it makes more sense to me that it's in the area that we have traditionally used for that. Okay, so just to get a little bit more of a close-up, they've come in, they've had the battle, they're at Rephidim, and they've had the battle with the Amalekites, they've had the incident with the water, we've had the incident of them looking back on Egypt with longing in their hearts for all the, quote, good things that they had in the good old days when they were under Egyptian oppression. And at any rate, now they're moving on and getting ready to move on. So let's read Exodus 18, verses, we'll go 1 through 9. And let me see, I'll go ahead and read that. So follow along with me if you would. Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Now Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, had taken Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her home, along with her 2 sons. The name of the one was Gershom, for he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. The name of the other was Eliezer, for he said, the God of my father was my help, and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and wives to Moses in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. And when he sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons with her. And Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other their welfare and went into the tent. Then Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them in the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced for all the good that the Lord had done to Israel, in that he had delivered them out of the hand of the Egyptians. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a lot of repetition in these few verses here. And typically, it seems to me what I've found is when there's repetition of certain things, that the writer, and ultimately God, is trying to make a point and emphasize a point. And one of the points is Jethro was the father-in-law of Moses. You look up the expression father-in-law, you're going to see it about 7 times just within these 9 verses right here, 6 or 7 times. So that's an emphasis there. And how do you think Jethro heard about all this good stuff with Moses associated with him coming out of Egypt? Anybody have an idea how you think he might have heard about that? In other words, he knew it before he got to Moses. That's right. You can't hide 1 million people or 3 million, whatever that number is. You can't hide that many people. And, you know, the length of time that it takes a big group to travel and do stuff is much easier if it's a smaller group, right? Like if it's a small trade group. Maybe what we'd call a caravan or something of that nature. A few people coming out. They didn't do this thing. It wasn't hidden away. And so it'd be very obvious, and other people can go faster. I don't know if you've traveled with your kids or not, but it's a lot faster by yourself if you're going someplace, get in the car and go, than it is marshaling the family, whether you're the father or the mother or whatever. It just takes a lot more time to do that. Well, when you got 1 million people, in effect, that you're babysitting and pulling along, it's just going to take longer. Therefore, individual players, and this was, again, it's not done in a vacuum, it's not hidden away under a bushel or something. This is known. I mean, there's this big group of people that are headed our way, and so word would have gotten out to Jethro, of course. And Moses, Jethro is going to bring Zipporah and Moses' 2 sons to him. Now, I find that interesting also, just in looking at this, because it talks about first of all, it talks about going to the mountain of God. Let me get down to that part. There's another picture of Mount Sinai, we think where it was, and it's just got some little bit of encampments there just to give an idea of scale. But you can also see where at the base, at the bottom of that, would be an easy delineation in terms of don't go on the mountain, stay at the bottom, because that command is going to be issued shortly by God. And so you can see it's easy to tell where it starts up because the land is so bare, for one thing. And so this fits into that. It's the mountain of God. It's called here, it's called Mount Sinai. It's called Jabal Musa today. It's called the Mount of the Lord, Mount Horeb, and a couple of other names in the Bible. And so there are different names given to this based upon who's telling the story at what point in time and what they're trying to emphasize. Also found it interesting that it's not recorded if Moses even said hello to Zipporah and his two sons. And obviously, we think he should have, right? I mean, he hadn't seen them for a period of time. He's been through all of this stuff going on in his life, the duration that he was there with the plagues, and then getting the children of Israel out, all the adventures that he went through there. And yet, after Zipporah and her sons are mentioned here, virtually they're not mentioned anymore in the Bible. In fact, it doesn't even say that, Moses greeted Zipporah and the two sons, but it does say Jethro brought them out to them. The emphasis here in this part of the story is Jethro learning about what God had done for Moses and the children of Israel. So, did Moses say hello to Zipporah and their sons? I assume so, that he did. But again, the emphasis is on Jethro being the father-in-law. Oh, that's a picture of when the children would have been encamped around children of Israel. And at top, God is in the presence, and so there's, fire and brimstone and all of this going on at the top. It must have been a magnificent sight. It must have been an awe-inspiring sight. I don't know, magnificent. It says that they feared when they saw that, and we'll talk more about that later. Okay, so Jethro visits. Get through these. And did he say hello? I'm sure he did. Hardships on the way to the encampment, he tells them about. And to me, one of the funny things would be at this point is, you think we've been through hardships. Anybody that had a vision of what they were going to have to go through for the next 38 to 40 years being here, in effect, you ain't seen nothing yet. You got more hardships are coming here. But at this point, the hardships would have been primarily the ones I talked about, the plagues, the Passover, them getting through the Red Sea, being pursued by Pharaoh, getting across, fighting the Amalekites, not having water or food, so they're getting food provided by God on a daily basis for them. All of these things are hardships, but there's a lot more in terms of time coming of hardships than maybe what they would have imagined. I'm sure than what they would have imagined. Okay, so hardships on the way, and then God's deliverance of the children of Israel. This is a big deal story that he tells Jethro. And again, it demonstrates the power of God in doing this. It demonstrates that the man that, in effect, that he set up for marriage to his daughter, Jethro, it demonstrates to him who Jethro is an important man. He was prince and prophet and priest. and or prince and priest at any rate. And so this genuinely impressed Jethro. So let's go to the next part, and we'll read verses 10 through 12. And let's see. Instead of me reading that, I'll ask somebody else to read that if they will. Somebody raise your hand real quick that you will do it. Yes, sir. Go ahead, Abraham.
Exodus 18, 10 through 12. Blessed be the Lord, Jethro exclaimed, who rescued you from the power of Egypt and from the power of Pharaoh. He has rescued the people from under the power of Egypt. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods, because he did wonders when the Egyptians acted arrogantly against Israel. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law in God's presence.
Okay, so I put up in question there, and in quotes, Jethro's conversion. And there are several commentators, and it would appear to be that way in terms of the reading that we make of this, that Jethro was so impressed that, in effect, he came over, he offered a burnt offering and sacrifices. Now, this is before it was codified in terms of the old law, the sacrifices. But certainly sacrifices have been made up until this time, man's dealing with God. So he offers sacrifices and burnt offerings to God, and Aaron, keep my bullets going here, and Aaron came with the elders of Israel to eat bread before God with Jethro on this matter. So in effect, they're celebrating or noting, number one, the effect that it's had on Jethro and Jethro's proclamation about God and his belief in God, and that God had delivered the children of Israel out to them. So was Jethro a convert? Maybe he was already there, maybe he's that influence, but we have specific language to indicate here his approval and his worshiping God at this point. Okay, we're going to move on. And so then we get to Jethro watching Moses. We're not going to read this section, but basically the story that's given here is about Jethro observing Moses, in effect, judging the people. These cases will come up before Moses. And this is not unusual at that period of time. You remember Pharaoh himself listening to people that came in, like Moses and Aaron. And so rulers of that time would spend some time listening to the judgments of the people. Moses took his role so serious that he would spend all day, in effect all day and all night, listening to these cases. And one can imagine, because of the nature of how Jethro observes this in his comments, in effect, Moses, you keep doing this, you're going to wear yourself out, number one. And number two, you're not devoting yourself to things that are more specific to what your role is as far as leader of all these people. And so Jethro, I use this story. My day job for many years was as a management consultant and a trainer, and I would do seminars and this type of thing for management. And to me, this was the first management consultant was Jethro, because he's observing what's going on, and he makes an observation to Moses, which is spot on which is you can't handle all of this. And if you keep doing it, what's going to happen? There's going to be a breakdown. And yeah, Joe.
I was going to say, it kind of reminds me of Acts chapter 6, when we see the Grecian widows and the apostles going, we don't have time for this. And
Yeah.
those individuals that can come in and help.
That's right.
Even when you think about Jesus with selecting his apostles to go out.
Send them out like the 2x2s and that type of thing. Exactly. And that principle there is even one, even the very principle applies to spreading the gospel. If it were just the apostles doing it, that's a big impact. But when an apostle converts, tells the story to 50 people, 2,000 people, 3,000 people, and some of them then begin to tell the story, it's like a multiplier effect in terms of its impact. So if you look at the spread of the gospel, for example, under this principle here of more people doing it who have been taught, in effect, how to do it, you'll see, by Paul's time, there are people in the household of Caesar that have been converted. This has gone all over the world in just a relatively few short years. So the principle still applies. You get back to my point. So therefore, I looked at, and I taught this in my class, several classes, that this is our first example of delegation of authority. And it's just basic principle of dealing with people. And of course, there are many lessons there that we can use today in terms of our potential impact on people and teaching them the gospel. We can teach people the gospel. We don't need to, if you will, haul the preacher in and have them do it. They're happy to do it. Don't get me wrong. But the more that we can do, and we have the obligation to pass on the gospel, the more that we can do that, the more people are going to be impacted. And so that's a good lesson for us today. And so he sets up this system of other people doing judgment, and these other people would listen to the cases of, I don't know what, this person stole my chicken, or this person, got my goat, or killed my goat, or my sheep, or whatever. Whatever those issues were on a day-to-day basis, they could go ahead and handle them, and Moses wouldn't even have to listen to it. And so this would relieve him, just as Joe pointed out, just as the apostles were relieved in terms of whoever the ministers were that were appointed that time, those ministers that were appointed in New Testament times in Acts to help out. That gave the apostles time to do work more suited to their role of being the eyewitnesses of Christ and passing that story along. Okay, anybody have any comments on that? Yes.
I think it's interesting that leadership has never changed, right? The qualifications for leadership and who makes a good leader has been the same since the beginning of time. But specifically, these are some of the same characteristics mentioned of elders, like in Timothy and Peter, when it talks about they are trustworthy, they hate a bribe, but more importantly, that they are men who fear God and who are willing to take on the task. And I just think it's interesting when we get to the New Testament, they know what to be looking for in these men. This is not, they don't dump something on them saying, oh, well, now you need to look for good leaders. They know who is a good leader among them.
Yes.
And this goes to your point of, not only are elders following that, but any person that desires to be a leader in any capacity can follow these traits and be successful as well.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking of a lot of things from my management training days, and this is not a class on management, but it does demonstrate leadership, as we talked about, and basically leaders There are leaders who lead by constraint. That is, it's your duty. You ought to do it. Maybe you're not natural, but you've got a role that you can fulfill. Specifically, I'm thinking of elder in this case. But there are other roles also where leadership can come out. And certain people have a gift, if you will, a charisma or something attached to their nature that demonstrates. Other people you see over time by their example and their goodness, therefore, that you will want to follow them because of their good example. It's not that they get up and rah-rah, which there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not their particular nature. So there are different types of leaders, but one thing about a leader is a leader's got to have followers to be a leader. You don't just lead yourself, by yourself. There's got to be people willing to follow. And while I'm talking about that, there are some people by nature of their personality that are leaders, but they're leading places you don't want to go. From among your own number will come grievous wolves, to devour the flock, that type of thing. There are people who are really good leaders, but you don't want to follow them. And how in the world would you know that? One way is don't get caught up in the emotion of whatever that specifically and more importantly, from a spiritual standpoint. Go to the Word to see that what they're teaching and their manner follows, their way of doing it even, follows what the Bible tells us to do on that. So that would be one way. The other thing is that I look at, is this person really concerned about my spiritual welfare, or is this person concerned about their own perception as far as other people go? Are they more concerned about how they look? Are they more concerned about their popularity as opposed to truly helping people with spiritual issues? Okay, any other thoughts on that? Okay. Oh, another thing that we can mention along with this is that there's a saying that was coined about law. I think it was in the 1700s, but justice delayed is justice denied, meaning the timeliness of the judgment. Just from a strictly a nuts and bolts standpoint, if you don't get justice soon, then justice delayed is justice denied. And if you lost something physically due to someone else's negligence, as we can look about in the law later as we get into that, if you're denied restitution for another couple of 3 years, then really you haven't gotten your justice that you should have gotten on a more timely basis. Okay, so Moses, you need to attend to things that are different. All things are important here, but in effect, your role as leader of this whole nation is to stay in touch with God and deliver that message to the people and deliver the people's message back to God. You're the intermediary. You're the one that's the connection, the main connection between God and the people. Okay, so let's go on to chapter 19. And again, they're getting ready to move from Rephidim to Mount Sinai, which is close by. And it's about a day's travel. And let's see, let's get to that. Okay. So we'll read 19, 1 through 6. And again, I need a reader for that. Joe, would you read that?
The third month after the children of Israel had gone out to the land of Egypt, on the same day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. They departed from Rephidim Therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, and you shall be a special treasure to me above all the people, for the earth, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel.
Okay. And so there's so much contained within that. And now in chapter 19, we're starting, I feel like there should be music in the background that's starting to build up this tension, because we're getting to the point of the law being given. And so 19, we start to focus in on that. And they're getting up to Sinai. They're going from Rephidim to the wilderness of Sinai. And they're there encamped, and it's Moses that goes up to God. And then the Lord called out to him while he was on the mountain. And these people, their name is either they're the house of Jacob or they're the people of Israel. And there'll be other names that come up. God has several names that are used, especially in Exodus, about him. The children of Israel also have other ways that the name is used for them. We're going to look at a couple of those that are here in just a second. And God says, see what I have done for you. Now, why in the world does God do that? What would be one of the reasons? To me, it would be the idea of repetition and recall, remember, think back, I did deliver you. I'm not sure how long it took, but it wasn't long after they got across the Red Sea and encamped that they started to murmur. And they longed and looked back at the flesh pots of Egypt, meaning the meat that they had available there, what they perceived as the good old days at that point. Now, a few months earlier, they're crying out to God for deliverance because Pharaoh is mistreating them. But now they get across, they're delivered in a highly visible, miraculous way. They see this, and we keep saying it. Zach pointed this out too, that if I had been there, I would have remembered what God did. I remember it now. It was thousands of years ago. But if I had been there, then I wouldn't be that forgetful. And yet, of course, we do that also. We haven't seen the mighty miracles and the mighty hand of God in this fashion directly as they had already. But it didn't take them that long to go back and start murmuring. And, once you put your hand to the plow, one thing a leader does is he looks down to where the tree or the thing on the opposite side of the field is to do a straight line if he's plowing. In the same fashion, a leader has an idea of where he's taking people. In the same way here, Christ told people, remember Lot's wife, man having put his hand to the plow. The idea of looking forward and progressing in God's way to achieve God's purpose rather than feeling sorry for ourselves. And that's perception, self-perception that we have that we need to work on, all of us, in terms of poor me, woe is me, look what's happened to me. And I don't want to play down anything that any of you have been through, especially after the last couple of hurricanes that we've had. But even these people looking at that would have a tendency to say, poor me, poor me. Well, yes, but God has delivered us from our sins, and He will deliver us if we do our part. Therefore, no matter what happens to me while I'm here, I'm still so far better off because of where I'm going. Okay, any comments? any of that. Yes, sir.
It's like you pointed out, the first murmuring was exactly 1 month after they left Egypt. This is 2 months after they leave Egypt, and they're at it again. And to have seen the Amalekites destroyed, to see the crossing of the Red, how these people, I mean, I know that we forget, but for what they saw and what they came through, they were described as a stiff-necked people who refused to yield in 1 Chronicles 30. That was their nature. You talk about the hard heart of Pharaoh, you talk about the hard heart of his people.
Yes, that's a good point. Not only did Pharaoh have the hard heart, but as Steve pointed out, so did the people. And again, we look at that in wonder, I think, and say, how in the world could they have done that so soon? And yet that's the nature of mankind. And if we're not careful, that'll be our nature also. Now, what else does he say to them? If you will obey and keep my covenant. God's getting ready to make this covenant. In effect, he already has, but he's getting ready to really formalize this covenant with them. But it requires something on their part. It is a covenant. God does his part, but he expects man to do his part. And this follows all the way through. It follows through to us today. So if you will obey and keep my covenant, if you'll do that, then you will be my treasured possession. So treasured possession is another name we could use for these people, if they're obeying and keeping his covenant. And also, he calls them a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now, we've already mentioned how extensively, especially incidents and some of the texts from the book of Exodus is quoted in the New Testament. And when you hear kingdom of priests and a holy nation, to me that just, oh yeah, I remember reading that somewhere in the New Testament, didn't I? Place I found was 1 Peter 2:9, where it says you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession. So almost verbatim, going back to what God said he would call these people under this covenant. Same type of names that are used in the new covenant as far as his chosen people and special people, the church. Okay. Any other points on that part so far? Questions or comments? Okay. Yes, Steve.
You know, this theme of reminding the people about what God did in Egypt continues throughout the Old Testament. They would continually, prophets in the Psalms, constantly reminding the people of that as the great event where God intervened and created him as a nation and did all that he did. The Old Testament is not full of miracles on every page. He intervened there, did these great things, and that was enough. And I compare that to the first century period of miracles. People say today, well, I need to see a miracle. No, all that was done. God intervened and acted, and that's enough for all to follow.
Absolutely. And yet it's the nature of people to say, I think, or to think, show me more. Test, in effect, to test God, if you will, ultimately, as the people here did, and as people have throughout the Bible. Okay, so if we look at verses 7 through 9, I'll go ahead and read that. Moses came, called the elders of the people, set before them all these words that the Lord had commanded him. And all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. What a great proclamation. All that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Indicating their readiness and willingness to follow God and what he says. And Moses reported the words of the people to the Lord. Why would the Lord have to have Moses tell him God is all-knowing. He knows what they said. He's everywhere. He's omnipresent. He's everywhere. Why in the world would he have that done? Because there's a pattern that's being developed here. And this pattern is that the people will talk to Moses. Moses will tell the Lord will tell Moses. Moses will tell the people either through the elders or directly themselves. The people will hear God telling Moses what to do. But Moses is this great intermediary, this person designated specifically to be the go-between between both. Somebody's going to have to tell me when the second bell rings. Has it rung already? Not yet. Okay, thank you. I am hard of hearing. And my wife says selectively so, but not true in general. So there's this pattern and this, and something Zach already touched on also in terms of not just patterns or prophecies, but we have types and antitypes. And Moses, for lack of a better term, will be one of the biggest types that we're going to have of Christ himself. The roles and functions that he performed are going to point toward a perfect or a perfection of that role in Jesus Christ. And so we can look at Moses and see his role, look at the patterns that he laid down, and from that have a better comprehension of Christ and his roles, and also our role in dealing with Christ also. So that pattern is followed out, and we're getting ready to go to chapter 20, where we'll get into the actual law itself being handed down. A great, great event coming. So this is chapter 19 is kind of the cliffhanger for next week or for Wednesday when we get into the actual law itself. Appreciate your comments. We're going to go ahead and stop there. Everybody's lined up to come in. Thank you again for your participation today.